Hey everyone, American Pizza Books here. So I'm coming at you today with another book review, and the review today is going to be on Others by James Herbert. Now this is actually, did I have that? Yeah, it was like right. This is actually my fifth excursion with James Herbert. I've actually read, well, the third book that I've actually finished by him. I have started two other books by James Herbert, and I've actually ended up putting them down. One of those being Shrine, and the other one being Lair, which was the sequel to Rats. And reason I put down Shrine was because I thought that it started out really, really good, and I thought it had a really interesting premise. But I felt that it, as the story went on, it like came to a screeching halt, and it just wasn't moving fast enough for my liking. And then finally, I just decided that I just needed to put it down and couldn't do it anymore because there's so much other stuff to read. And then Lair, I actually forgot at work at the time, and I kept forgetting it. And then after a while, I just decided not to continue with it. So that's kind of the explanation there. But I kind of had a similar, well, not really a similar issue. My issue with Lair was that it was not matching in the tone with Rats. But anyways, this isn't about those books. This is about Others. And like I said, this is the fifth book that I've read by James Herbert, and the third book that I've actually finished by Herbert. The premise of this book is basically about this former movie star who has been sent to hell, essentially. But he's visited by two angels, and he is given the opportunity to he has another chance to redeem himself and to get into heaven. And basically what ends up happening is he is essentially reincarnated, and he is brought back to Earth as this deformed person, essentially. Basically as a hunchback. And the way he's described is kind of like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I kept kind of picturing that, and also picturing, putting on my own personal features of how I thought that the main character looked like. But that's kind of what I was picturing. But he's brought back as as someone with a bad deformity and whatnot, and he's basically given another chance to kind of right some of the wrongs that he made in his previous life. And that's essentially the premise. And then he's given this, he's a private investigator in this book, and he's given this case of finding this son for this widow who gave birth to this son that was thought to have been, that it was thought that the baby was, I believe it was like born prematurely, or that it had died in birth, but that she believes is still alive. And so it's basically Nick Dismas is the name of the main character, by the way. Nicholas Dismas, and people call him Dis in the book. But it's basically him trying to track down this son for this woman, and kind of coming, getting certain leads, and kind of coming to dead ends and whatnot. And then it kind of, there's sort of like a twist at the end a bit when he finally finds the son and whatnot. But that's essentially more or less the plot of the book. I went into this book thinking it was going to be a little bit more horror based than it actually turned out to be. It turned out to be more of like a mystery thriller, I would say, with maybe some elements of horror, because there were certainly some chilling moments in this book. But it was more, I would say it was more of like a thriller, like mystery sort of, than an actual straight horror novel. But again, like I said, there are certainly horrific moments in the book. So I thought the premise was really interesting. It's why I picked up the book in the first place. Definitely a good premise by James Herbert there. The characters I both liked, but also had an issue with. Now, the main character, it's told from a first-person point of view in this book, and the main character, Nicholas Dismas, I thought that he was really well-rounded and really well-developed as a character. And of course, it being a first-person point of view, we really get into his head and whatnot, and get to know just all the stuff that he's had to put up with, with having a deformity and how people have treated him, and we also get insight into something that happened to him as a child that's like really, really screwed up. And, naturally he's kind of bitter and angry at the world and whatnot. I mean, as most people probably would be in his position. But he's also very sympathetic and whatnot, and he's kind of funny at times. He does have kind of like a sense of humor and whatnot. Is kind of witty and sarcastic and so on and so forth. So I thought he was a really interesting, well-rounded character. I thought that Herbert did a good job developing him and whatnot. I can't really say the same, though, for really most of the other characters. Now, my problem with the other characters in this book is that there were so many introduced, in my opinion, and they weren't given enough room to actually breathe and show themselves for who they really were, if that makes any sense. One habit that James Herbert has that I've noticed, because another book that I read of his was The Magic Cottage, and he did this in that one too. James Herbert has a tendency to do the telling and not showing, essentially, where he'll tell you what the features of a character are, or how a character is, or how they act and whatnot, or what kind of person they are, rather than showing you how they are as a character through interactions and dialogue and whatnot. For example, so Nick runs a private investigating business, and he works with 3 other people. And we're given backstories for each of the people that he works with, but we aren't really given a lot to work with in terms of actual interactions with the characters and whatnot. I know 2 of the workers, which was Philo, and then there was the other woman. I can't remember what her name was already, but he worked with 2 of them, and then those 2 we only see in the beginning of the book. Really, we don't really get to get much dialogue from them, or that many interactions from them. Really, the only one that we really get some sort of kind of depth or feel for is Henry, the accountant, and even with him, I would have liked to have gotten more interaction and more dialogue and just and something more from him as a character, and I don't feel like we really got that. We're also introduced to a psychic, Louise Broomfield, and again, we get a little bit more with her. I felt like she was a bit more developed, but again, she's introduced and it's shown that she has these powers, basically, almost. There's one scene where Nick has a pounding headache, and Louise puts her hands on his head, and then his headache is relieved and whatnot. And it's I would have enjoyed going more into depth on that part of her character and how she developed these abilities and whatnot, but we don't really get that exactly. There's also another character, Constance Bell, who essentially is the love interest in this book for Nick Dismas. And it's funny because when she was first introduced, because Nick is calling the hospital to find records for this care provider who may have delivered the son that he's looking for of this woman. And we're told that this Constance, because she answers the phone, and we're told that she has the voice of an angel, and Nick is instantly smitten with her. And I was thinking, I bet that when he meets her, she's going to be deformed like he is. And sure enough, that's what happened. And I mean, that was probably my least favorite part of the book, was kind of the romance between Nick and Constance. Especially since it happened over the period of 2 or 3 days. We don't get a lot of... we do get some conversations with them, but it's mostly him asking her questions about the person that he's looking for. And as far as their actual relationship, we really don't get much, in my opinion. in that telling and not showing. There's another good example is when Constance ends up coming over to Nick's apartment, and they have this conversation about they end up having a conversation about like Constance's past and whatnot, and also that she's had to go through, and basically them having this conversation where they connect. And we're not actually like given any dialogue. We're not shown that conversation. It's just summarized to us in like a paragraph. And it's like, I would have liked to have seen that conversation. I would have liked to have heard Constance talk about like her experiences rather than having it summarized. You know, we're told about the conversation, but we're not actually shown that conversation. And that would have helped me, like, you know, being more invested in their relationship. And I just really wasn't. I didn't really care all that much. Which kind of weakened the book for me a little bit, because Constance is kind of Nick's main motivating factor in going to this hospital to save her, but also trying to following the case that he's been working on as well. So I didn't really enjoy that part of the story so much. I feel like it could have been taken out and it wouldn't have really affected much. I could have done without the kind of romantic subplot. I don't think it really added anything, and I don't think it was that well developed, to be really honest. So, I mean, I guess that's the one issue I had with the book, was just a lot of the characters that were introduced weren't as well developed as I would have liked them to have been. Although the antagonist of the book, Dr. Leonard Wisbeach, he was definitely an interesting character. Like, whenever he had dialogue or scenes with him, I was definitely like captivated and interested in what he was saying and whatnot. Like, the scenes with him and Nick were always really interesting to me. And we do get like more backstory with him like towards the end of the book, towards like what would be like the climax or the falling action, essentially. I think another issue that I sort of have with, and not just with this book, but with Herbert in general, and this is another thing that I've noticed, is that sometimes he gets a little bit too verbose with his writing, and he tends to get caught up in details that don't really matter that much. For instance, about 40 pages in, we meet a character named Etta, who is I believe she's a lawyer. Yeah, I believe she's a lawyer or something to that effect. But she's a friend of Nick's, and when we're introduced to her, again, we're told what her nature is and how she is as a character, which again, you know, would like to actually see that and not be told that. And then we also get a description of what she's wearing and her briefcase and whatnot. And it's like, we don't really need to know all that stuff. Like, I get having details of what she looks like and whatnot, but it's like, it's just needless details that we don't need to know and doesn't add anything. And it slowed down the pacing a lot at times as well. Like, there were times in this book where it was really, really slow. Like, I had to slog through this book at certain points. And just because a book is slow doesn't necessarily always mean that it's uninteresting. Like, none at all. Not in the least bit. But, yeah, at certain times I felt this book really, really stalled. And I think that was because of Herbert's bloated writing style at times. I'm not saying it was badly written. Not to say that. I just felt like it was bloated and it could have been cut down a little bit. Again, something I've noticed with Herbert's writing style. Not saying that Herbert's a bad writer. Not by any means necessary. It's just that sometimes he gets a little bit too... He tends to get caught up in details that, you know, don't really add much to the story. So really, it was the writing style and sort of the way that he developed some of the characters or tried to just didn't work for me. But as far as the story, I did enjoy the story, or at least the premise. There were some really good scenes in this book. There was one scene where, like midway through the book, where Nick is basically having this paranormal attack at his house. And there's like scratching on his window, then pounding on the door. And the way it was described was like really, really creepy and like really freaky and whatnot. And then there was this scene where there's this scene from hell where like all these people with deformities are having like this huge like orgy, and it was really really disturbing how it was written and whatnot. And then when he actually goes to the hospital and he's going into like these underground areas, we see these other people who are, deformed and whatnot, and just some of the deformities and whatnot, and the way that Herbert again just describes them. He's very detailed, and like the detailed writing does come in handy at times. Like it does actually work at times too. And the way that he detailed some of these people with these deformities and how they act was just chilling. Was very very chilling. So I really enjoyed that. And then, going back to what I said about, the telling and not showing, there are times when Herbert does actually show. Like, there's a scene when he's kind of getting to know Louise Broomfield, who is the sidekick, who kind of gets called in to help, Nick, or who Nick, finds to try to help him and whatnot. We get a scene where he's going into, like, just venting and just how he feels and just really opening up and whatnot, and then he tells us about something that happened in his childhood. And that scene I really really enjoyed because it got me even more invested into his character, and it showed me just the visceral reaction and just the raw emotions and just how he felt, and that went a long way with me being more like invested in his character. And it's like I would have liked to have seen more of that with some of the other characters like Constance and whatnot. But unfortunately, we didn't get that. But, I mean, I think that shows that, Herbert, doesn't always, resort to that, the telling and not showing. He does show sometimes, but other times he doesn't, and that's kind of the issue that I had. Yeah, that, and then, what else? There was something else that I wanted to mention. Well, and the theme of this book, it really kind of is, it's also kind of a commentary on how people with deformities are often treated and seen by society. And I thought especially towards the end of the book when he finds these others, well, that's why they're called, hence the title, Others, hence the title, but like when he finds, the others, who have similar, deformities and whatnot, and how they're being treated and the mentality of it, it really made me think, and it really got me feeling all sorts of things. It made me feel just sad, and whatnot. And it got me to think about how I would react and how I would react to someone like in this book who has a deformity and whatnot. And I guess that kind of plays into the horror aspect, like, living as someone, with living like someone like Nick who has to deal with having, the deformity and how others treat him and see him in society and whatnot. And yeah, it was kind of sad. It kind of made me sad a little bit. Towards the end with that, the messaging and whatnot. Not that it was a bad message, but just like, it's unfortunate that, people with deformities are often seen that way, even today when, we're definitely far more accepting than we were, 30, 40 years ago. It still is just, it's a shame, But overall, though, I would not say this is a bad book by any means, necessary. I would probably give this like a 3.5 out of 5. The thing with James Herbert is that, see, I want to love his work. I really, really do. I really want to like just devour, his works. I just want to really be into it. And I've yet to find a book that has done that. Like, The Magic Cottage was one that I read and finished, and I thought it was decent, but nothing that blew me away. I probably would have given it like 3.5, like probably the same rating that I'm giving this book. I would probably rate this one like a bit higher than The Magic Cottage, but not by much. And I think that this one is also decent. I'd say it's good. Not great, but good. I think that if it had been cut down a little bit, by like maybe 50 pages, 100 pages maybe. And maybe if we'd gotten more depth with some of the characters, it could have been like a 4-star or even a 5-star potentially. But because, it wasn't, but because it was kind of long in parts and long-winded and a bit bloated, and because of the way that Herbert wrote some of the characters and didn't develop them as well as he could have, it kind of takes, a bit of the rating off. And yeah, I don't know, and then The Rats was the other one that I read by him and finished. Now that one I really enjoyed. I actually did a review of it on my channel here. I did a review of that one as well, and I had a lot of fun with that one. But The Rats was more of just like a fun creature feature type book, where it's just a bunch of rats, killing people and whatnot, just apocalyptic and shit. It was just a really fun book. This is different, this definitely has a lot more depth to it, just with the plot, with the messaging, and so on and so forth, whereas Rats is kind of just, it's fun. It's kind of mindless fun. It's a fun book, that's not a bad thing. It's just kind of like, it's apocalyptic, like I said, rats killing people. It's fun. It's good fun. But this is definitely a lot deeper than Rats, and especially for a work that's, fairly character-driven. I need a bit more. Now, luckily, Herbert has a lot of other books, and I will definitely keep reading his works and whatnot and checking out his works because he has a lot of books that really look interesting. I think that he has a lot of interesting plots and ideas. It's just the execution isn't always on point for me personally. But I will keep reading his books. Maybe, you guys could recommend me some. I hear that I have a few of his works in mind that I want to start. But anyways, others by James Herbert, I give, like I said, 3.5 out of 5. Decent book, decent read. I'd say it's a good book. Not great, but certainly not bad either. Certainly not bad. I'd say that it's a good book. Check it out. It's a bit slow, but just stick with it. And I thought the ending was also pretty good. I don't think I mentioned that. I did think the ending was good. I think that it tied, the plot up pretty nicely. I did feel at one point that it was getting a little bit off focus in terms of what the plot originally was. But I do feel like toward at the end it did kind of bring the main point of the plot back into focus and wrapped it up really nicely. And also one more thing I want to mention, I love the opening line of this book. I will say that. Actually, let me see. Okay. It was a day like any other, except there are no days in that singular, in both senses of the words, place. No minutes, no hours, weeks, or years. No seconds either. There is no time in hell, you see. There just is. That's the hell of it. I love that opening line. That's just really, really funny, just genius. I love that opening line. One of the best opening lines ever, honestly, that I've read. I will give the book that. But anyways, let me know what you guys think. What did you think of others? Have you read it? Have you not read it? Let me know. Let me know some recommendations for Herbert that you would recommend to me and whatnot in terms of what to read next by him. And yeah, so peace. Keep on reading, and you guys have a good day.